Hi everyone, Ben Jordan back here again on the Schematica channel. Another quick tip, and just while we're on this whole topic of reuse device sheets and now the new design reuse blocks which incorporate a snippet from both Schematic and PCB, it occurred to me a couple of things. First of all, thank you, Nikolay. Nikolay from Altium actually commented on my video, my last one, about the new design reuse block project type, and that they've actually created a new refactored panel in Altium Designer specifically for reuse. Somehow in that video I missed it, so forgive me. But I did want to show you that really quick. So that's one thing. And the other thing I wanted to mention was it occurred to me there's probably many Altium Designer users out there who've never even heard of snippets and don't know what I was talking about in my last video when I said snippet. But as you can imagine, a snippet is a snippet. It's kind of like something you would do taking a screenshot or whatever, only it's retaining intelligent data. So for example, let's say this DS2406, this is a one-wire bus EEPROM that's used for identification purposes. I could put a serial number into it, a model number, whatever. It's just a useful little device. So I'm going to use that perhaps in a lot of different designs, and rather than putting it on a whole schematic sheet and making that a device sheet, which is how it's been used here in this old nanoboard design, maybe I just want the schematic or the board layout portion of that. And so a couple of things we want to be able to do here. If I control and actually just to show you how it's connected through on the board side, this has actually already been routed on the board, this bit of circuitry. And so I might want to make sure on Tools menu that Cross Select mode is on. And just to understand where these devices are on the board, I don't want to grab the 3v3 or ground nets and highlight those because they're everywhere, and ground and power planes. But I do want to grab these components, and I'll actually use a right to left mouse drag because that grabs everything touching the border and inside of the border of the drag. So only the components are selected. Then over in the printed circuit board view, I want to go zoom, Z for zoom, selected. There they are. They're on the back of the board. So the selection is there. Let me do VB to flip the board and then go to the bottom layer. Those components are mounted on the bottom layer. So there they are. Of course, I could disable the silk screen, but it's these. It's these plus the routing between them that I want for the PCB snippet. So let's say I want to capture that bit of schematic and a bit of PCB that goes with it. So I'm going to select these. I'll choose also back in properties now. Of course I have a selections, but I'm going to go to the filter and turn everything off, but I want components and tracks. That's the post select filter. I really need to deselect these. So I'll hit Shift C to clear the selection. The point I'm making is I don't want to select all this polygon ground around this. I just want the parts and the traces and routing between them, right? So, so let's go put the selection filter to tracks, vias, components. Tracks, vias, and components. And I'm going to use, again, right to left, click drag, and that gives me the one-wire bus prom. That's the 6-pin part. That I guess it's a diode, protection diode on the right there. And with a selection like that of something that's pre-done, pre-routed, I can right-click and choose, let's see, snippets, create snippet from selected objects. And then it asks me to give it a name. And where do I want to save it to? So this is something that's fairly new. Snippets used to only be saved to a folder on your hard disk. And the default folder was in the examples installation directory. So it wasn't particularly useful. Now the default location is your Altium 365 workspace or whatever Concord Pro server you happen to be connected to. But you can also save to the local folder, and you can define the local folders in your preferences or from the new design reuse panel that Nikolay was telling me about. So if I go to, let's just say I want to store this locally, just for want of a better location. So this is, I'm going to call this one wire EEPROM ID, and I'm going to suffix it with PCB because this is the PCB side of the snippet, and this is a one wire bus EEPROM DS, I forget the part number, 2406 or something, 240X let's say, and pull-ups and protection, because that's what's in this circuit. So I'm going to create this. It's going to go to my local snippets folder. Now, here's a tip. If you're not using an Altium 365 workspace or Concord Pro server, many users are familiar with and happy with and trust Dropbox as a secure cloud storage system. I also use Dropbox. I use it for many different things. That's the advantage of Dropbox, is I can put anything into it. Whereas the Altium 365 is exclusively for any and all things electronics related to do with Altium Designer. But just for argument's sake, I specified my snippets folder to be a subfolder within my Dropbox directory structure. So my snippets, if I capture just quick snippets like this, no matter what computer I'm on or where I am, as long as I have my connection to Dropbox and it synchronizes, I'm going to have my snippets. So bear that in mind. You can also create new folders here if you want to. Okay, so I'll click Create. So that creates the PCB snippet, and that's made the parts and the routing. But here's the thing, that's just a bit of circuit board. Those components have IDs, they have reference designators, part numbers, all of that, but these are just captured in the snippet as footprints, standalone. So later on, normally when you use a snippet, you have to manually relink the components from the snippet from the board side to their counterparts in the schematic. And there are various scripts Altium users have shared in the community to automate some of that process, but you still got to jump through a few hoops. Nevertheless, that's the PCB side of the snippet. Now if I go back to the schematic, here's the schematic side of the snippet, right? So I've got those two surface mount resistors, the protection diode, all of that. And now I'm gonna grab everything, and of course only the components are selected because I didn't reset my selection mask. So or selection filter. So let's switch it back to all on. Now I select the entire bit of circuitry and everything selected, including the nets, and I right click and say let's go to snippets and create snippet from selected objects. So same thing again, I've got to give it a name, and I'll call this one wire bus EEPROM underscore ID underscore SCH, because this is the schematic counterpart. One wire bus EEPROM ID circuit. And again, I'm going to just save it locally, so I'll create it. Okay, so now I have a bit of schematic and a matching bit of PCB. Where do we find these? We find them on the new design reuse panel. Now I've already docked mine over on the left hand side there, but to get the design reuse panel, you go to the panels, bottom right panels menu, and you'll find design reuse there. And this gives you the panel here. So this says nothing to display. That's interesting. It should be displaying because I've created, but there's hierarchy in the drop down, obviously. So yes, I have to select the particular snippets folder, And then, of course, you can see clearly I've got those two snippets I just created with a preview bitmap of what was selected and placed in that snippet. Now, if I'm in the schematic editor and I hover over a schematic snippet, you can see the place button is enabled, or I used to be able to drag and drop off the snippets panel. There used to be a snippets panel for this. This has been replaced by this new design reuse panel. And I can always save to server. You'll find that more and more and more in Altium everywhere in the user interface, because every user's being gradually migrated into the cloud, you could say. Again, you don't have to, but this is going to become the considered best practice. But in any case, I could place that. Now I can't place it in this sheet because this is a read-only device sheet, so I'd have to have a new empty schematic. So let me create a brand new printed circuit board project just to demo this like I did before. I'm going to create a new one and just call it Design Reuse Panel Test in my default location. And now we've got a new project. Where is that? Here it is. I've got too many things open, of course. And I'll add to my new project, add a schematic. Add, oh gosh, there's too much latency in that pop-up. I wish that would speed up. Add a new blank PCB. And now, of course, while I'm in a schematic page, it's adding the board. Okay, that just changes all the panels, of course, because I switched to the PCB editor there by creating a new board. So while I'm in the board, I can place the PCB snippet, but the place is grayed out for schematic. That makes sense to me. So if I go back to my schematic, the panel's dancing around here. I can place the snippet. There it is. Note that just like regular copy paste, it resets the designators by default. So snippets are essentially a persistent copy and paste. It's like a clipboard that stores it to a file, so even after reboots, it's still there. And that's the schematic part. Then on the board side, I've got the place menu for the PCB part. Let's go zoom board, ZB. I don't know why it thrust me into deep space there, but anyway, let's just say I was placing that here. And I'm going to have some DRC violations because I don't have nets or anything in this brand new board. So just ignore that for now. But the point is, I've got the coinciding schematic part and the coinciding PCB part, but they're not linked. So if I make changes on one side, it's not going to synchronize to the other, like designator update or whatever. So one still has to go into the project component links and link these parts, and that's going to be hard to do if you don't know, like as I said before in the schematic side, if the reference designators are different, which they inevitably will be. So in this case it's easy. There's only 4 components. I can match them just by looking at this, right? Each one of them is unique. It's that simple. And then I perform update, so they're now linked. Now I can synchronize and run the ECO from schematic to PCB, PCB to schematic, and it'll work. So that's fine for a little bit of small snippet. The whole point about making the reuse block a formal thing was retaining those links, so you don't have to manually do that. You can't do that with snippets. And you can't make a design reuse block which retains the schematic and linked PCB parts together in at least as far as I can see in this version, this current release of this feature, you can't do that locally. The only way to do that is to use an Altium 365 workspace or Concord Pro server and save your reuse block there, as I showed in the last video. So if you haven't seen that video, go back and watch it. However, having said that, I stand corrected by Nikolay. Thank you, Nikolay, for your comment, that any reuse blocks I create, either from scratch or by using snippets or copies and pastes into a reuse block project, which then gets released into my server, is also available in this design reuse panel. And so that gives us the combination schematic and PCB linked, so there's no problem. So if you're using Altium 365, you'll get the benefit of that for sure. And how that might look would also be, let's say I've got this snippet and the other snippet and the links now. Well, we would, like we did before, create a new reuse block, and we'd place whatever we want in the schematic. It's just a regular PCB project. It's honestly, you could just take a whole PCB and turn it into a reuse block. There might be situations where you want to do that. For example, you have the Arduino reference designs and you're using Arduinos a lot for prototyping. A lot of engineers are doing that now. And maybe you have an Arduino Zero that's got the SAMD20 microcontroller on it, and it's got everything needed to connect to the microcontroller, program it, do debug. It's got JTAG. It's got all the supporting decoupling and power supply stuff. Why not just turn that whole Arduino reference design into a reuse block and then, you know, use it as is, or modify it around the edges because you want to connect things differently, or just take the schematic part and do it that way, because you know every board you're going to put that in, you're probably going to position the components differently and have to reroute it anyway. So that's how we do it. Now, again, the one I made last time, which I never released that, but I will just for fun. I can always go back and clean it up later, but just save it, have it released. I'll give it a name. This is going to be, oh gosh, it's going to be USB 2 LPC 2888 JTAG, because it's from the JTAG adapter. And again, like with storing locally, I can choose different folders in my server workspace to put this in. I'm happy just to keep it in the basic reuse blocks folder. I'll say taken from DT01 JTAG adapter. I'll click OK. So that gets released to the server. And then again, if I go to this, I don't want to keep this open anymore. I don't need it open anymore. It should actually automatically just close because I've released it. Oh, here we go. We're still releasing. I find there's a lot of waiting around with this cloud stuff, you know. Okay, so that's closed. That's finished releasing. That's what's taken me back to the schematic from the other project. But likewise, back in the design reuse panel, I now have this second design reuse block, which is really just two snippets. So unlike device sheets, which use the hierarchy and create a whole schematic page as a reusable element that the PCB doesn't go with it necessarily, you would have to make that a snippet and somehow marry them up together separately. The reuse block is taking what was previously snippets and just keeping them joined and keeping the components linked and the nets linked between schematic and PCB, so you have automatic synchronization there. I'm certain that I could make it a hierarchical block somehow by putting the snippet inside of a child sheet and making a release block of that, because again, the release block is just a PCB project, which in and of itself could have a schematic hierarchy. So that's my update to the saga of design reuse in Altium Designer 22 as it is today. Please, again, hopefully this is helpful and useful, and you can use some of these features to become more efficient as a designer. If you're not doing this, I highly recommend using this practice, because you'll be surprised how much you collect over time and how much time it can save you to have a library of reusable chunks. And again, they can always be broken into and modified if some parts become unavailable. So it's really not a problem. If that's helpful to you, please hit subscribe, smash that thumbs up, hit the bell icon so when I release more videos you'll be notified, and please do come back soon. I look forward to seeing you again.